Well, I'm delighted today to be speaking to Victoria Garrett, who's the Head of Residential for Asia Pacific here at Knight Frank in Singapore. Welcome, Victoria.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here with you.
So we're going to talk about some of the latest trends from the residential property sector across Asia and also into the UK. But first of all, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your background and the team you have here at Knight Frank.
Thanks, David. So I've been with Knight Frank for 12 years. Can't believe it's actually been that long. It's sort of gone by in the blink of an eye. But I started in London, working in prime central London, doing £8 million plus sales. Then moved to Dubai to follow my husband there and managed to stay with Knight Frank and was working in the domestic market there for Knight Frank in Dubai. And then I ended up heading up the international team and selling outbound properties really into the UK from Saudi, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman. So an amazing experience. And then in 2017, I was promoted to become head of residential for Asia Pacific for Knight Frank, based here in Singapore. And now I head up the region. So we've got outbound teams that focus on the UK predominantly, a little bit of US and Australia, and then domestic teams in Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia. So never a dull moment.
Wow, really exciting times, eh?
Really exciting times. And we've got about 10,000 people working for Knight Frank in Asia across residential and commercial, so it's a really big part of our global business.
Great. And is working with intermediaries dealing with high net worth clients an important part of the mix? Do you often get referrals from other partners who are dealing with clients looking for real estate investment?
Absolutely. It's a really, really important part of it. So we work very much with our own ultra high net worth database of buyers, but also we get referred clients from different client advisors whose clients are looking for expert advice. And what we pride ourselves on doing is giving that trusted long-term view. It's not just about selling someone a property today, it's about that long-term relationship we have with our clients at Knight Frank. And actually off the back of that, 4 years ago, we set up our private office in London, which we've recently expanded to Singapore with a gentleman called Nick Keong taking that role here. And we have Henry Fawn in the Middle East and a gentleman called Hugh Dixon in New York. And actually at the moment we are recruiting for somebody to sit in Hong Kong. So a key part of Knight Frank's business, I'm not sure you're surprised to hear, is that ultra high net worth segment and how we look after them across not just residential, but commercial as well.
Fantastic. And having spent the week here in Singapore, it seems to me the city's booming. There's a lot of people moving in, relocating into the city. How are you seeing that impacting on the residential market here in Singapore?
Gosh, Singapore is back.
Yeah.
It is so busy. It's brilliant to see. There's a lot of people in town, obviously, at the moment. There are a lot of conferences going on, and Singapore is very much open again. They have had a phenomenal residential market on the sales piece at the high end. There's not enough stock. I think that's something we're seeing throughout the world. Stock's a big part of driving markets. Then on the rental side, it is crazy. We're getting people coming in from Hong Kong, people from Taiwan, mainland China. We're also getting people from Europe moving in, and actually there's not enough properties. And so we're seeing rents go up by 20, 30, even 100% in some cases. And if people aren't prepared or able to pay the increased rent, there is somebody absolutely waiting in the wings to take it. So Singapore's absolutely buzzing.
What style of property would an ultra high net worth client find here? Is it villas, penthouses? I mean, give us an example of the sort of stock you might have for sale with the ultra high net worth client.
So a real trophy asset to buy here in Singapore, but you need to be Singaporean or have permanent residency. It would be a good class bungalow. And it's called a bungalow, but it doesn't mean it's on one story. It can be on multiple stories, but it's in prime districts and a certain size of property. But there are only a few thousand of those in existence. You cannot build more. So they are really sought after by Singaporeans, but also people who are moving to Singapore to make Singapore their home. So that would be one sort of really sought after part of the market. The other would absolutely be penthouses. Interestingly, what we have been seeing, because they're obviously brand new, lovely apartment penthouses, but also we've got the older style properties that were built 10 years ago, say, which are a lot larger in size, and people are buying those and renovating them. And something we hadn't seen in the Singapore market before was that renovation piece. And through COVID, and this has also been driving the demand on the rental side, we've seen a lot of locals renovating their properties. Expanding, adjusting that work from home environment into their home living space. You know, we've all gone through a reset globally in terms of how we use our homes. They've become our sanctuaries like never before. And so we've seen a lot of people renovating. That's been difficult because it takes longer, obviously, to get supplies, to get the sort of workmanship in, and then they're renting. So that's taking properties out of the rental pool for people to be able to rent. So that's been interesting in terms of that demand. But we've also then seen people coming in from outside, buying these older penthouse apartments and renovating them So that's been two sort of parts of the market that have been very hot.
Oh, fascinating. Obviously, you cover the whole of Asia from here. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about some of the other key markets that you see for residential real estate investment.
So for us, in terms of the outbound piece, if we're looking wider than Asia, the UK, and obviously the UK is in an interesting time at the moment. We've obviously had multiple changes of Prime Minister. There's a lot of question marks in terms of recession. But actually what we've seen is there's a real currency piece at play. So we've seen a lot of American or dollar-pegged people coming into the UK market at the high end. My teams that do outbound are based in Greater China, so Shanghai, Beijing. They do marketing for us for overseas properties, Hong Kong, Singapore, KL and Bangkok. And it's been interesting. I've been traveling quite a bit recently into Bangkok and KL. And the narrative is the same across those markets. It's education driven predominantly, or people have a business. There's a reason that they're buying and investing there. So we have seen a lot of activity from Greater China recently into Hong Kong. I would say probably our international buyers in the higher end of the market, about 55% of that market anyway. And some of those are already based in the UK and others obviously investing from outside. So we've had a really strong run recently and I don't see that changing. A lot of those buyers are buying in cash as well. So obviously with the interest rates going up, they're not so effective, or they're hedging more into cash and a small mortgage. So we've had a lot of interest from Hong Kong into London, but also into New York as well. So we did a trophy asset deal into the Oman in New York at over $50 million US. Recently, that was driven by business and education from that investor. And the other thing I should talk about is the fact that historically, a lot of the investment from Asia into the markets like the UK or Australia or the US was investment driven. So buying to rent out, or their children would study there perhaps in 5 or 10 years' time. We're seeing more people buying bigger properties now because of COVID, because they're wanting to use them. They want space for the family to go and stay there as well. So,
is it a bit of a sort of plan B type thing? They like the thought of having somewhere they can go to spend a longer period, as you say, rather than having just the rental driving it. Yeah.
So absolutely, people are. We talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
You know, I've been looking at my travel schedule. I'm traveling less frequently, but for longer. And we're seeing people going over, taking their kids, settling them into school at the beginning of term and staying for a longer period of time. So not just dropping them off. So yes, absolutely, they're staying and they're investing in a sort of home from home is what we've been talking or calling it, is that it is a sort of proper second residence that they are going to use rather than an investment.
And how do you kind of deliver the service from over here for the UK? I mean, is it that these clients are frequent travellers to London anyway, so they're just a joined up service with colleagues? Walk us through kind of how they would, if they don't know London as well, want to assess different parts of the city, or how you hold their hand through that process, if you like.
Something we really take pride on is holding our clients' hands and giving them expert advice. We are so lucky with the phenomenal research that we have at our fingertips. Almost too much research sometimes. You're like, goodness, it's incredible. But we want our clients to make informed decisions they're comfortable with. So all our teams on the ground across Asia are expert, we like to say specialist, in advising people investing overseas. So they understand and know the UK market very well. And then they plug in the right person on the ground for that client if they're viewing. You talked before about having a virtual event and how they're becoming more popular. So we do a lot of virtual viewings. And actually pre-COVID, it was more selling off-plan properties with a brochure. Now it's actually transporting that person to physically view. I mean, I did a WhatsApp viewing through COVID. I sort of touched on, I worked in the Middle East with a Saudi client. So my client's husband and wife were in Saudi. I was here in Singapore. My colleague was in London. We were all dialing in on a WhatsApp call, viewing a property.
Isn't that incredible?
Just incredible.
Yeah.
And then they actually bought without seeing, but they had an advisor. They had their lawyer go and actually look himself as well, just to give another pair of eyes to go and have a look at the property before making a decision. But that wasn't a small sum of money. That was over £8 million worth of property that they're investing in. So we're seeing people do a lot more virtual viewings, or they've got somebody on the ground who they know there, who goes and has a walk around the area and gets a feel for it. But it's all about really educating, and our teams being expert in knowing what they're selling and being able to share that knowledge. But it is a joined up service, and say they're buying to live in it, they want to furnish it. So we have Knight Frank Interiors who can furnish it. We've got Knight Frank Finance who can mortgage it. If they're letting it out, we've got sort of 28 offices across London who can let it out for them and manage it for them. So we pride ourselves on being a sort of tailored service which covers all aspects of what somebody would need. And then if they want to sell it in the future, we can obviously do that for them again.
And I mean, obviously at the prime level, that's really a London play. But outside of London, I mean, what kind of demand do you see from Asia for the rest of the UK?
So it's been interesting that we've seen, so Birmingham, Manchester have always been sort of hot areas outside of London for investors. That continues to be of interest. If someone's looking for a home, then sort of Surrey on the outskirts, somebody who has family who are at school and they want to have a sort of bigger residence, we do a lot of business there as well. So there are other markets that drive in. We did see back a few years ago, probably pre-COVID, more interest into markets like Germany. There's a lot of talk pre-Brexit about Germany becoming more of a financial hub. We're not seeing as much of that now. So they're the sort of other areas outside London, I would say, that are of interest. And then that home from home piece, we're seeing more people looking into those holiday homes. So that would be across Asia. Bali's been an interesting market for Singaporeans to invest in, even with the pandemic. So a lot of people buying that sort of second home they can get to easily. And then we've seen a lot of people looking at sort of island living as well.
No, interesting. And you mentioned before that education, is a strong draw. And I guess that also takes people nationally because there might be children in schools out of London or universities. So do you think that's a really strong card for the UK? I mean, hopefully the UK can maintain its status there in the education sector globally because it's a huge draw for families, isn't it?
100%.
Yeah.
I was at the International Schools Show, BESA, a few weeks ago. I've got 2 children. Yeah. My husband and I are looking to send our eldest back to school in 2025. And so there's a real draw from expats as well as locals in terms of that UK education. That has not wavered. If anything, it's been strengthened, I would say, from markets like Greater China through this period. So absolutely that will remain a key driver. And London is London. The fundamentals of London will remain the same. So I don't see that going anywhere at any point.
And do you see next-gen younger clients coming through from wealthy families, buying in cities like London and New York with different tastes and desires to the older generation or the styles of property or investment they might have sought to buy? Do you see that? We see that in other areas of professional services, but do you see that in real estate as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Actually, that's made me think of something. A colleague of mine was speaking to her this week, and he's got a client who the father bought in Cardiff because the son studied there for no other reason but that emotion, that passion play. Talking about the next generation, historically, if someone was looking at a trophy asset, they'd look at that sort of golden triangle in prime central London. Actually, it's more now about product driven. And we're seeing some trends for areas. And actually, I do a sort of monthly call with my teams to get the feedback in terms of deals being done and appetite and where they're looking for their clients to invest. And Canary Wharf is back on the radar again. So areas like that, and also places like Shoreditch, a bit cool, a bit more edgy. So actually, it's more product driven than location driven at times as well. So that's been quite an interesting thing to see. Whereas the older generation were more about the postcode.
Yeah. And you mentioned before the amount of research that comes out of Knight Frank. I know Liam Bailey compiles the Wealth Report, and there's some really interesting stats that come out of that on an annual basis. But I mean, what's the general outlook that you're looking at for the UK residential real estate market? I mean, there are lots of headwinds, but how do you see it as a firm?
So our forecast is that we're going to see, but actually let's put this into context. Obviously through COVID, we saw huge growth in the London market, 20+% in terms of growth. What we are looking at now is a correction, probably about 5% this year, 5% next year, but over the next 5 years, an increase of 7.5 in prime central London. So I think that, yes, there are headwinds, but we haven't seen that return of the international buyer fully yet. Travel started to open up, but it's not easy to travel out of China still. We are seeing people travelling out of mainland. But obviously, Singapore is a market that's always had an affinity to London. We're only just starting to see that investment, that purchase come back from Singaporean buyers as well. So I think we'll see a lot more of the international buyer coming back in. I think that will support the market. There are headwinds, so it's going to be an interesting time. But I'm confident in London in the long term, as are the business.
And there could be deals to be snapped up if there are owners in London that are highly leveraged, the interest rates going up. There's cash buyers here with dry powder and a long-term view. could be a good opportunity.
There could be. I don't think we're going to see that much distress.
No.
Because a lot of people talk about that. A lot of my expat friends are like, great, I can buy that amazing property back in London. It's
Not so easy. Yeah.
You know, blood on the streets. Yeah. It's going to be a mass slash in prices. I don't think we're going to see it to that extent. There will obviously be opportunity, and there's always opportunities in these situations. But I don't think it's going to be quite what people might hope. So there will be opportunity, but not huge discounts.
That's why it's important to take good advice and get the strategic
I think it
position
is.
right.
I really do. And I think that property is such an emotive purchase when you're buying for yourself, for your home, and those drivers. And I think that will remain. And the stock thing is key. There is still a lack of stock. There are not enough houses being built in London for the demand. And so if something is in a prime location, if it is a special property, you're still going to have a handful of buyers, more than a handful of buyers. And it's that dry powder piece. And that's not just in residential, it's in commercial as well, which is quite interesting. There's a lot of money poised, waiting to see what can happen. And that is going to be ready to pounce on opportunities.
Victoria, wonderful to talk to you today. We look forward to sharing this interview.
Thank you very much.
The latest technical content delivered through global conversations with professionals for professionals.